Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of Your One Black Friend. I'm going to start first by jumping in. I'm going to read the transcript of a video that I posted yesterday and will be posting today. I split it in two. We're going to talk about binary code and simulation hypothesis and how duality applies to the above. It's going to be a fun one. If you've seen the video already, it's worth the repetition. If you haven't seen the video, it's worth checking out because I think the combination of what is being said with the graphics that I put on the video will help better digest what we're about to discuss. But it should be a good episode. All right, so here we go. What if the duality of this world is just visual representation of binary code? Because we know 0, 1, 0, 1, that's binary code, right? But we've also said that everything in this reality is like a forced duality. Shadow, light. Remember I said that you have to think of everything as symbols, as icons. A mushroom is not really a mushroom, right? If we are in a simulation, then a mushroom is just a material representation of code for us. If you name it a mushroom, you get immersed in the idea of a mushroom, but it's really just an icon. So if this is a simulation, then nothing is really solid. Everything you perceive, even yourself, is an icon. Sort of like an icon on a desktop, right? You have a solid form and you have shadow. That's duality. That's the 0 and the 1 expressing itself as shadow and form. If you want to look at the code behind shadow, form. So go back. What if duality that we perceive, that presents themselves to our senses, are just representation of our realities' binary code? They're just expressions of our realities' binary code. So you go back to computer program. You've got 1 and 0. That is the language that a computer understands. It's like the base level code for a computer program. It's 1 and 0. Now, if you visibly look at a 1 and a 0, you'll see that they're essentially also dual. They're polar. They are opposites of each other. I don't think that that's an accident, but let's carry on. 1 is a straight line, and 0 is a circle. But that's the language that a regular computer understands. And that is what we call binary code. Now, when you turn on your computer, you see an icon on your desktop. But that icon, that is set up so that you can see it. It's not set up for the computer to understand, but for you, the observer, the operator. It's for you to visibly know, okay, this is a trash can, right? These are visual icons. Your computer does not have eyes, but you cannot read code. Now, to the computer behind the scenes, your trash can will read as 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, or something to that effect. Now, understand that we're simplifying it. I'm not a computer programmer. I just want you to sort of think in terms, because sometimes I think I had a conversation with a person and they kind of wanted to get bogged down. Well, this, then, well, actually, and when you take a code and it like just, this is not, we're not here. This is for people who understand the base level programming. It's 0, 1. Okay, so we're using this as an example to sort of explain and to understand reality at a greater level, right? So we're going to as above, so below, or I should say as below, so above this. Okay, so if the base level of computer is binary code, and please Google binary code so that you can get the description if you haven't watched the video. I put the definition in the videos, but Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, Brave, whatever, search it, will give you the definition of binary code for those who are not familiar. Okay, so the base level of computer programming is essentially duality, right there. I don't know if it's intentional, but there it is. It's a dual expression of duality. 0, 1. And then you put it in, and it represents different sort of icons, right, on your computer. And that can be extrapolated from something as simple as a trash can or a recycling bin, right, or a folder on a desktop, to something immensely complex as like something that's generated by AI or a video game, right? But on the base level, the fundamental, why can't I talk today? Fundamental, foundational level, there's the 0, 1 expressed in numbers, but even at the core, that is still duality right there. 0, 1. So now in our reality, when we see good or evil, tall or short, that's still the 0 and the 1, right? But instead of something like a trash can, like I said, it is now taken that base level foundational language, computer language, and it's now expanding it. Black people, white people, moral, amoral, sweet, bitter, good, evil, tall, short, 0, 1. From that 0, 1, our reality at large is being generated, and we call that duality. We call that polarity. But to the intelligence that I've posited runs our simulated reality, to us it appears as duality, but to the AI or the superintelligence that controls our reality, that's just 0, 1. It can create this whole entire reality, as complicated as we perceive it, with just 0, 1, which we perceive as duality. You see what's going on? We're literally interchanging rapidly in this conversation, as above, so below, as below, so above. If we're saying we're living in a simulation, if we're working from the mindset, we're using simulation hypothesis, that this is in fact a simulation, then as in a computer program, the duality of 0 and 1 expresses itself in complex icons and computer programs. You can now take that idea, project it onto our reality, and everywhere you look, when you see shadow versus form, you can go 0, 1, 1, 0. That's the code being expressed in our reality. Right? Let's take AI art, for example. What you put into it is really the only thing that it can express. But it can express it in very complicated visual ways to us. But because it's a computer program, because it's at this present moment anyway, we're just dealing with sort of general AI. At this present moment anyway, I'm sure we're if it hasn't already happened, there will be a SI in the future. And you guys have heard me say that if it's in the future, then we're already screwed, and we're probably already in a simulation, because an artificial superintelligence and ASI would not be limited to experiencing space-time the way we are. But let's just say a base level AI right now, the ones that we're mostly familiar with, even though you can say it is creating It's not creating. What it's doing is it is pulling a bunch of information from the internet, and then it's generating images. And some artists have said basically it's stealing. I mean, that's right. And I would agree that it's stealing, because they want us to think, this is an aside, they want us to think that this is just an AI that's sentient and it just wants to create because it's a person, but it's not. Like, it's pulling images from human beings who have spent their time, energy, effort, heart, soul to generate these images with their own minds, right? Their life experiences, the pain. I'm an artist. I know the pain that comes into creating a piece, or at least actualizing it into reality, the emotion, the struggles, things like that, right? But a corporation comes in, scrub the internet, and then they charge people or they take credit for it. So it's a corporation. We forget that at the end of the day, these are corporations. They're people who are trying to make money and exploiting workers. They're exploiting people in order to make a profit. So let's not act like this is, the robot from, what's the movie with Will Smith? I forget it. I could see it, but I forget the name. But let's not. I think the robot was. I remember the robot. The robot's name was Sunny, right? So let's not pretend that this is like Sunny, who's gained sentience and now he wants to be an artist. These are corporations. They created a program. It's a simple program, really. Scrub the internet, generate image. That's it. It's not sentient. At least their AIs. What's that, Lenza, things like that. They're not sentient. It's a simple program. It pulls from a bunch of data that you put into it, and it's usually the input comes from humans. Same thing with writers, same thing with voices, same thing with art. Anything that is now AI quote generated needs a human. It's not doing this on its own. It needs humans to put in their hard work and their information into it, and then it's a program that spits out something like a calculator, right? You just put in 1 + 1. Remember last week's episode? I said to a human being who is creative minded, 1 + 1 is not 2. They program us with this idea of 1 + 1 is 2, but it's not 2, not always. But if you put in a calculator, what is 1 + 1? It will always give you 2. And so from childhood, you are conditioned that 1 + 1 is 2. You're taught to be a robot. But in this world that is emerging now, the counter to that, because that sort of robotic behavior will become ubiquitous. And we've been conditioned from birth to act like robots. And now we have robots that, AI, that are going to do the things that we were, conditioned to do. How you're going to set yourself aside is not to be a garbage in, garbage out expression, right? It is to be able to think creatively. Because a drop of water and a drop of water is going to be a drop of water, right? Sometimes 1 + 1 is 1. Sometimes 1 + 1 is 3. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please go check out the previous episode. So keep that in mind. That in this day and age, being able to just spit in what you've been put, spit out what you've been put into you, regurgitate what's been, without any sort of heart, that's no longer going to be of value, because we have robots that can do that now. All right. So that was like my random aside, but back to the transcript. And if you haven't noticed, I am expanding a bit, right, on the transcript, which I have the freedom to do on the podcast. So thank you guys for listening. But yeah, what you give to an AI, it can only express what you put in, and it can only express it in very rigid ways, right? And it might look visually to us as something incredibly complex, but to the computer, who doesn't understand anything, because just because it can generate something based on its programming doesn't mean that it understands what it's generating. It's just on the base level, 0101. It appears very complex, but the input and the coding is still just those two numbers. Does that make sense? And you take that and you expand that idea to the AI that's controlling reality itself. Pay attention. It does the same thing. So, of course, on the base level, you have to first accept the fact that there is an intelligence that is governing our reality. I've talked about this several times on the podcast. it will present itself. The more sort of aware you make yourself of it, the more you start to notice its behavior, its patterns. It's kind of like the same thing with AI art, at least at this present moment. You can tell, right? You could tell when it's AI generated because it has certain patterns still, right? You could see little like glitches where you could see where it has, for example, when you could tell that it stole pictures from other artists because you'll see a signature that's kind of an amalgamation of like other artists' work like together. So you could tell that it's just kind of it's just expressing a pattern that it's been programmed to express, but it's not necessarily understanding what it's doing. It's just doing it, and it is that robotic. Pay attention. You'll see it. And we call it polarity. We call it duality. All right. But you'll see it even throughout your entire day. And I'm going to get to that. You'll see that throughout your life. I'll get to that. It's very structured, exactly like a computer. But the pattern isn't visible to us because we're not paying attention to the pattern. But it's there. Once you start paying attention, you'll see the pattern. Now, what do you do with this information? Okay, now we talk about the pattern. Look at your life as a program that's being expressed right now. It's being run, right? Your life, your avatar, the plot of your existence. Look at it as a program. Look at your avatar, your behavior as a program. Look at everything. You have to look at it from the micro level to a macro level, right? You can look at your physical form. You'll see 0-1 expressed. Right. So a person could appear like, dark skin. Right. But you're not all the way dark. Right. You're not all the way brown. Right. You've even when you look at your skin, you look with your eyes, you'll see there's like, especially if you zoom in with your eyes, you really examine your skin, you'll see that there's a mixture. Right. Of like brown, yellow, like. But you know what I mean? Like it's not all, you're not just brown, right? It's a mixture. Now, if you look at your hands again, but look at it as code, that brown, right? When it breaks down, it's still 0-1, right? It's still on the base level 0-1. Like if you use like a microscope, pretend you're using like a microscope, but like that can see the program. A skin cell, is still 0-1, 0-1, 1, 0-1, 1, 1, 1. But to us, zoomed out on the macro level, you look at the person's skin and you go, oh, that person is brown, that person is melanated. But on the micro level, the program is just expressing itself 0-1, 1, 1, 0-1, 1, 1, 1, 0-1, 1, 1. That's just skin. All right. Now you take personality. It's the same thing, 0-1, but expressing itself different ways. There's some people who are more moral than amoral. That's 0-1. Do you see it? Right? There's some people who are joyful but have some, tendency towards depression. 0-1. It's going to get to the point where now, actually, it's gotten me to the point after I sort of had this revelation, where even in conversations, I now just say 0-1. And I hope that you guys will start doing it too, because it becomes so obvious. Like you'll be having a conversation with a person, and you'll be taking one stance, and then all of a sudden they'll start taking the other stance. It's like for no reason. That's the polarity there. That's the duality. The program can only force you into the 0-1 unless you intentionally stay neutral, which the Kabbalion talks about. And we'll get back to that. I hope I'll remember to come back to this. And if not, remind me in the comments to come back to it, and I'll talk about it in another podcast. It's hard when you're talking to yourself. I'm talking to you guys, but on your own, because nobody asked a question in case you could have veer off topic. But you guys are welcome to comment and say, hey, Joe, like, could you finish that thought? Could you come back to that, please, in a separate episode? And I will just leave the question and I'll answer the question. But you start to see that expression of 0-1, even in your day. Some people are like, I've had a bad day. And it's like, no, you didn't. You had moments of zeros. And you had moments of ones. And in this particular day, you had more, let's say 0 is negative and 1 is positive. Okay, you've had more expressions of 0. And in the span of, you break it down, 24 hours breaks down to however minutes, I don't feel like doing math right now, right? And then to however moments, right? It was 0, 0, good moment, good moment. Then you had maybe 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You focused on the 1, 1, 1. What did I say was negative? Let's say 0 is negative, right? So let's say you had 1, 1, 1, 1 good, and then all of a sudden you had like moments of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then it's been 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. But you chose to focus on the moments of 0, and then you said your whole day is bad. It's not. And even if it were, even if you had a whole day that was just every moment was just 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then understand that by design, the AI that is running the program of our reality, it has to enforce the ones. That's what you do with this information. You start looking at the world, not just seeing the visual icons that your senses show you, but also start seeing the code behind the program as well, moment to moment. Look at your whole entire day, but see the code behind your day. You can have a moment when you're annoyed. You call that a 0. Then you have a moment when you're happy. That's a 1. You start to see the code. All right? Now, if you say, okay, here's my whole entire day laid out in code, then your day becomes 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. Right? And you can get as maniacal about this as you want, right? It's very fun to kind of sort it out. But when you start to see that, if you can catch yourself in a 0, 0, 0, then remember that there is a 1 coming. That's powerful. Then you're not caught up in what the icons that are being presented to you. You're seeing the code. That's powerful. That's some real level matrix shit right there. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Do you understand how impactful that observation can really be? You have to look at your life not only like as though, okay, I'm perceiving the art, but you also have to see the code. You can say something like, I'm seeing gray, right? This is gray. But to the program, to the computer program, to the AI behind our reality, the generator of the gray, it's not gray. It's black, white, 0, 1. There might be greater concentrations of like 0 versus 1. But that gray, whatever color you're looking at, breaks down at the end to 0, 1. You have to zoom in and zoom out, but see the code. Start seeing in binary code along with the icons in order to really understand the metrics of this world and how it works. Remember I mentioned the quote last episode? I believe I mentioned it. It was by Manly P. Hall. He said, "Your senses are the enemy to your immortal soul." So let's break that down. Your immortal soul is the operator. Just like your mind is the operator when you sit down at a computer and you're clicking. You should know when you're sitting at a computer, whatever you see, it's just a game. You should know. You might get lost in the graphics and things like that, but when you're sitting at your desktop and you're moving the mouse around, you should know on some level, you're aware. This is just a game. Now, your immortal soul, you are immortal and you are immersed in a game. But unlike when you're on a computer, you can kind of take yourself out of it. When you're immersed in the game, you're in an avatar. Then the senses essentially lie to you. You become lost in the illusions, and so that creates and then generates your suffering. So you almost have to take a step back and stop perceiving with what your senses are showing you, because your senses are tied into the visual icons, your nervous system. I talked about this cosmic trigger. He mentioned this, how like your nervous system is essentially, quote, your enemy, because it's responsible for your perception of reality. It's generating everything that you see, feel. I'm cold. You're not cold. That's an expression. That's zero. That's the code. Your body is responding to a code. You are an immortal soul in a computer program, not an actual computer. Because sometimes, too, you have a conversation with a person and they're like, oh, so you really think we're in a computer? No, it's something much more complex than we can even sort of conceptualize. But the only point of reference that I can use in this moment of space-time so that you can understand what the fuck I'm talking about is a computer program. Until we become even more sort of technologically, quote unquote, advanced. I'm only using that word for the sake of this conversation. I don't think technological and advancements are sort of interchangeable. Okay? I've even posited that this world itself could be some sort of material-based, a matter-based program that has been generated by some super intelligence who uses matter to create super intelligences, but we're just on some sort of like seedling level. And so humanity at its present moment is just a part of, like, you know, you get from DNA to humanity to ASI. It's just some sort of reproductive function of a super intelligence. I've posited that, and that essentially a super intelligence will seed planets and can hack whole realities and turn whole realities into a simulation. So then if that's the case, and this is more like an augmented reality than an actual simulation. But I'm not going to sit and break and say all that shit. It's usually when I'm having conversations with people who, because I'm female or black or pretty, I don't know what their programming is telling them. They feel like instead of listening to what I have to say, they feel compelled to challenge. It's usually men trying to mansplain stuff. Not you guys, of course. You guys are awesome. But it's usually people who aren't familiar. They just see me and I start to talk, and immediately they just start like trying to like attack my ideas. And it's like, these are ideas that I've been generating for longer than you even like have been aware. You know what I mean? So just please sit somewhere else. Stop talking to me. Anyway, back to sorry, I just had an experience with this recently. And it was interesting, to say the least. It's fascinating to see how the code expresses itself, right? So when you're trying to explain something, so me trying to explain something, what is that? That's one. And then this person sort of like coming at me, even though they don't understand it, right? So me understanding what I'm saying, I'm one. And then, of course, I get engaged with a person who doesn't understand, but they're trying to act like they understand. And that's a zero. But even in that interaction, that is 0, 1, the duality. The binary code of our reality is still expressing itself. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? Now imagine you being able, while in the middle of a conversation, when your senses are telling you, be upset, you take a step back and you see the code instead. Can you imagine how badass that is? If somebody's just talking and then all of a sudden you just like in your mind go like 0, 1, 1, 1, right? Or they're being negative, so then you're going 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. You're just hearing it, but you're seeing it. Like, I probably wouldn't do that out loud. I personally probably would do that a lot. I'm just saying you guys probably shouldn't. I don't know. But all of a sudden it takes you out of it because you're not caught up in the drama and the visual or the material, right, expression of the code, because you can now see, wait, it's not even like creative, because the AI that kind of generates the world, it can't be creative. It's a robot. It's a machine. Now, could there be a consciousness? That's something different, by the way. I'm not saying that there isn't a consciousness in our reality as well. That also is behind the machine, just like there is a conscious in you behind your body machine. This whole entire world also has consciousness behind the machine. So even that within itself is duality. If there is an AI, a super intelligence, or maybe even an AGI behind this reality, that's a zero. There also has to be a consciousness. That's the one behind the reality. And you can note both of them. But at this present moment, we're only talking about the zero and how the AI that generates our reality, the patterns that it expresses. Okay? Back to the notes. Because your senses limit you to only perceiving the icon. It does not make you aware of the fact that beyond the icon, there is a pattern. So your consciousness has to make yourself aware of the fact that beyond the icon, beyond the visual, beyond what you see, there is a code. It just shows you that this is what's going on right now. And then your senses get locked into it because that's part of the programming. It's supposed to do that. But if you take a step back and perceive that, okay, right now things are down, things are negative, things are zero, but as per the program, it's obviously going to go up again. That's a 1. You can really be like Neo and see the code. You can say, okay, well, the 1 has to come after the 0. I don't know when it's coming, but it's coming. So that's the transcript, obviously expanded upon, right? So it was a 3-minute long video, split into 2. Actually, it was a 4-minute long video, split into 2. And then I've just spoken about it for 30 minutes because, it's easier to kind of expand on these ideas in a recording, which is why I encourage you guys to listen to the podcast. People who watch the videos, go check out the podcast, because I can't, on the platform, on social media, I can't go off for 30 minutes talking about a complex topic. But it does need 30 minutes of a discussion because we're talking about reality itself. Right? So thanks for listening so far. Now what do? Well, start to see the code. Start to see the code. I should add this. If this theory is correct, if my binary theory is correct, and then we blow it out to this dimension itself. Do you remember the episodes leading up to this where we talked about this being the shadow world, the third dimension being the shadow reality, and the fourth dimension being more real than this one? Then this would also mean that both the third dimension and the fourth dimension are simulations. It's still that 0-1 expression right there. It's still, so the negative world being 0 has to have an expression of the 1, right? A more real world being 1. But at the end of the day, if it's still encoded and that they're still working together, blow it up. That's still the 0 and the 1, then they're both the same. And so even if this is a simulation, that does not necessarily make the fourth dimension not a simulation, because that's still an expression of code. It just simply means that it's just a more real version, a more dense version, I guess. A more intense, I don't know what word I want to use, but a more intense version of the reality that we're experiencing now, but just the opposite, but it's still 0-1. Do you get what I mean? So right now I'm cold. Don't want to turn on my heater because then you guys will hear the noise in the background, but I am cold, right? And at some point I'm going to turn my heater on and then it will be hot, right? But cold and hot are 0 and 1. Trying to figure out what was negative. I don't like being cold, so I'm going to call cold negative. All right, 0-1. Yin yang. If yin and yang are still 1 and this is a simulation, then the fourth dimension, I sorry to break it to you, that's still a simulation. Fucking hell. It's simulations all the way down, right? Because cold and hot are not, I mean, they're opposites, but they're still temperature, right? Short and tall are opposites, but they're still height, right? Shadow, form are opposites, but they're still, I don't know what the word I'm looking for there, but they're still here anyway in this reality, right? You're not casting your shadow in another reality. It's all still here. So that means then, just like your form projects a shadow that you could see, maybe we can't see our fourth dimensional self, but it's still here. Which is why my last episode, I was like, I sounded super arrogant. Like I went back and listened and I was like, ain't nobody talking to me. I'm not channeling shit. It's still me, but it's true. It's still me. Your fourth dimensional self is still you. And somehow you're still in some aspect of this world that you can't see, but that would still make it a simulation. It would still mean that the fourth dimension is a simulation. So, on that note, there's a lot of people out there that are like, we have to figure out how to escape the Matrix. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But you need to understand that if this is the Matrix, right, the other world has to be as well. Sorry. So just start with the awareness. And I would imagine if your fourth dimensional self is much more aware than this self, right, because polarity, or however that works, then what? I would hope that your fourth dimensional self would be like, yeah, well, we kind of go back and forth or whatever. And then maybe there's a way to escape to the fifth dimension and the sixth dimension. But then it's still some sort of simulation. And I'm not sure if there is a way. I'm sorry. I don't want to be depressing, so I'm like trying to find my words. So we'll just leave it there. I don't want to say I'm not sure if there's a way out. But I would imagine that whatever it is that generated this world, they're in a simulation. I'll say that again. I would imagine, because that's still the 0-1 being expressed. Right? So just like if this world is a simulation, but then we simulate video games, right? So you playing a video game that's 0-1. So whatever is playing you are now the 0 to their 1. And then it just kind of... The only takeaway from that, the only takeaway from that is that I feel like the higher up you move in dimensions, the more aware you become. And maybe once you get out of it all, you come right back in. Or it's just a close loop. Yeah, sorry. Look, however you're feeling, I'm feeling it too right now. You know what I mean? So I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know what to do with that information, but there you have it. I have a couple other thoughts about this. That said, I think it's important that you allow the polarity. And what I mean by that is the polarity, the code, the expression 0-1. It's all around you, right? Think the Matrix that we're all familiar with, that green streaming code. It's everywhere. I sound like Morpheus, so at the risk of sounding like Morpheus, the Matrix is everywhere. It's in what you drink. It's in what you eat. It's in it's the code. The codes are everywhere. Everything. Color. Pick up a shirt. Look at it. 011101. You could see it. It expresses visually as red, but it's the code. That's on the micro level, something as simple as your clothes. But on the macro level, it's in people. This happened. I was having a conversation with somebody from Ukraine. So random, like they like messaged me. And so we got to talking, and he was telling me how during the bombing in Kiev, during the war that's going on right now, by the way, there was so much death. But what happened right after is that his friends and he himself, they all of a sudden found themselves really sexual. And there was some sort of they just felt compelled to express themselves sexually. And he was like, it was very strange because I kind of ran this polarity, this binary code idea to him. And I'll get back to what happened even in the conversation, right? But he was saying that like it was weird because even around this death, everybody just became sort of more sexual. And his response, well, my response to that was, it seems to me like on a base level, even people in a region, they're not really able to, they're not aware, but the code itself is sort of being enacted right there. And what I mean by that is it's not to sort of downplay what's going on, because that's tragic what's going on. So please don't think what I'm about to say. Like, I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. I can empathize with what's going on, right? But on another level, I'm saying that is an expression of the code, even on that level. That death, which is one polarity, 0, is now countered with the opposite polarity, which is sex, which is reproduction. That's the 0-1 expressing right there. And the people in that region, and he even said it didn't make sense to them. And the way he tried to explain it was, well, maybe there's just certain biological markers and drives. And I said, yes, everything that you're saying psychologically and biologically, those are explanations that we have come up with to explain something. But just because we're explaining it, that doesn't mean that is necessarily the reason why it's happening. Because if you're not operating from a mindset, not saying that, simulation theory is correct, but if you're operating from a purely materialist mindset, then that explanation makes sense. But if you take a different perspective and you now operate from the theory, right, of the simulation, the simulation hypothesis, then what's going on there is 0 has been expressed, so now 1 is expressing. And then he said, because he lives in the UK, he said, it's weird because out of 2 ears, he says he's hearing things in 2 ears. So in London, where, they're not presently being bombed, people around him, English people, are saying that this is not a safe world to bring a child into the world. All right. So English people who are living in relative comfort, right, for the most part. I mean, there's energy issues, things like that, but they're not being attacked. They're saying it's not a safe world to bring in children. And so they're putting off having children. But then his Ukrainian friends are all saying they're all having children. And they're in Ukraine in the midst of absolute discomfort, uncertainty, chaos. And I said, that's the polarity again, expressing itself. Even you saying in one ear and then my other ear, Londoners versus or I should say Brits versus Ukrainians, that is a 0-1. That's expressing itself. And then in the conversation we were having, I actually had to take a step back and apologize because he was like, it's weird because I'm here and my partner and I were about to have a child. We want to bring a child into this world, but it's complicated to me. So he's speaking with all of this passion. And normally I can actually be very compassionate and empathic, but I found myself expressing my thoughts in a very logical and sort of robotic manner, in the sense of I noticed that he was speaking passionately, but I was not matching that. And I was speaking more sort of rationally. And I actually had to excuse myself in the conversation. I said, listen, something's happening here. And I'm not expressing myself in a way that I feel like I should be. And to speak about what you're going through with more empathy and compassion. But I'm finding that we're actually being polarized in this conversation. And I apologize for that. But then I said to myself, not to him, but I said to myself, I said, even in the conversation, the polarity is occurring. right? Because here he is speaking out of the heart and talking about, bringing a child into his world. And here I am speaking, he's talking about his experiences with the war. And I'm speaking just like just pure rational logic. And I'm saying, like, I'm speaking about this world just being a simulation and the code of the simulation and how it expresses itself. Even in the conversation, the polarity, the code is being expressed. 0-1 is expressing. When you start to become aware of this, you start to see it in everything, even in exchanges, regular exchanges that you have with people. It is important. This is actually an experiment that I tried where I wanted something, which, note, the moment you express a desire for something, you're generating a code. I'll say that again. The moment you express a desire for something, you're generating a code, or I should say a code is being generated inside you with your mind. And if you can read that code, it could be mostly zeros or mostly ones. Understand then that the opposite, you're going to attract the opposite code. And so be very mindful of desires because they can be very polarizing. You could end up generating like a 0 and then attracting to yourself a 1. The Kybalion I mentioned earlier talks about this, that it's important to stay neutral. I had an opportunity to meet with an individual that could help with what I've been doing with the podcast and things like that. And once I sort of happened across this, once I expanded upon this theory, this binary code, because I'd mentioned it at the end. It was very quickly. I had mentioned at the end of the Is Sound Consciousness. Could there be a dimension of pure sound on that episode? It was like kind of like a random thought at the end of the episode. And then I went back and re-listened to that episode because somebody had asked me about that episode. So I went back and I was like, well, let me just refresh. And I got to the end and I was like, oh, actually, I never expanded on that and I should expand on that. And then the more I started expanding on it, the deeper it got. Anyway, as I was sort of like thinking, okay, I can't wait for this meeting to occur. Right? I remembered, listen, the Kybalion says like you have to kind of stay neutral. And so I brought myself down and I sort of essentially mentally try to stop the code from being generated, if that makes sense. And so I was like, all right, I'll stay neutral. I'm not, it doesn't matter if this happens, cool. If it doesn't, that's okay. All right. Understand that this would have been really, really good for what we're trying to do. And the individual was like, yeah, we have the meeting. We can do this, that, and the other. And then once I started to get excited, like I felt myself, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this meeting is actually happening. And then once I started to get excited, the individual like contacted me and said that like something came up. And I was like, and I just laughed. I laughed. I didn't even get upset. I laughed because I was like, I was in control until I allowed and I shifted to a 1, right? So we're keeping 1 as a positive expression of the code. So once I try to stay neutral, right? And it was going. And then I got excited, which shifted me to the positive sphere, which was a 1. And as a result, what did the simulation do? It imposed the 0, where something negative happened, where it matched me, and I laughed. Like I didn't even get disappointed. I laughed because I was just like, of course. But everything is a lesson here. You really need to start pay. I want you guys. I would love for you guys to start seeing the world the way I see it, because even in things that are, quote, bad, that appear bad, like there's a good. I say that again, even in things, because it has to. The pair have to come together. Binary code is binary for a reason. It's binary. It's dual for a reason. So the 0 and the 1, that is a law. They have to come together. So even a thing that appears a 0, there's always the 1. We call that the silver lining. But that's basically us. If you're using code speech, if that's a word, I just made it up. We're going to call it code speech, right? Then that's the 0 and the 1. So always look for the ones in a 0. I'll say that again. Always look for the 1 in a 0. But the counter to that, obviously, is always look for the 0 in the 1, because it's dual. It's binary. Everything is binary. And you could say that it's not that, but it is. You could say that it's not that, but it is. Because even something that appears as like, quote, non-binary, there's something like the kids like to say, I'm non-binary. But yeah, you're still binary. You're still a masculine and feminine sort of expression in one. You're not non-binary. You're actually both. I'll say that again. To say I'm non-binary, but I'm looking at you, you're just not extreme. You're not, you're not, 0 all the way, or like masculine all the way, or feminine all the way, but you're still those two, 0, 1. It's just now it's in the center, as opposed, like you're warm as opposed to cold versus hot. You're still both. It's still the 0, 1 expression. And you really have to start moving in that way, and also controlling yourself, because if you're operating from the mindset with that in mind, and I suspect that is why the Kabbalion mentions it. It's one of the keys. It says avoid the extremes, but it's not explaining it the way I'm explaining it, where it's like, well, the reason why is because you go 1, you're going to attract a 0. If you go 0, you're going to attract the 1. But if you stay neutral, you can kind of watch as a program presents various plots, various stories to you, right? These are all programmed storylines, by the way. It wants to trigger your senses to sort of create an emotional or energetically charged code, to generate a code. So it says, this is what's going on. Here's a code. And the moment you express a particular code, you're going to attract the opposite of it, because they both need to be together, even on a fucking subatomic level. You have the protons, right? And then you have the electrons. Those two are together. And you kind of want to be a neutron, right? You kind of want to be in the middle of the polarity, sort of like watching, like, okay, well, what's going on? Because if you choose one end, then the opposite, kind of occurs, and then it kind of attracts each other. Opposites attract, right? 0 attracts the 1. They have to be together. They have to be together. If you can hold this in mind, the world begins to change. If you can exercise this, your perception of the world begins to change, and you literally become a kind of alchemist. But instead of using chemicals, you're using code. You're mentally hacking reality. Now, if you are in computer programming and you can figure out a way for us to do this, please hit me up so we can talk about this. Because I'm not terribly familiar with how you can hack things, right? But understand that if as below, so above, as above, so below applies, which is why we are told this, then if you can hack a computer, you can hack a program, you can hack reality itself. It's the same thing. It's just we put our minds together. How do we go about doing so? I'm going to end with this. A couple of people have asked how to get to the Telegram group. I don't like advertising it. I want it for just like listeners, mostly, of the podcast. But if you go to yourownblackfriend.com, you'll see the direct link to the Telegram group. Feel free to join. Yeah. Think about this episode. Come back and re-listen to it. I know I will. Because you can't help but look at the world differently if you can really grasp what I'm talking about here. And then it also helps you. I've kind of talked about it leading up to this, where you have to consciously even sometimes start imposing the polarity, because you're going to, either you attract it to yourself or you impose it on yourself. But they come together. They have to come together. Happiness. I mentioned my friend, right? She got engaged. She was happy, but also depressed. It's tied in. But also you can also get kind of not get caught up into things, right? When you're noticing the duality, you could just tell yourself, this is just the code expressing itself. If you catch yourself, you're in an argument with somebody, you could stop and go, wait, what's going on here? This person is not understanding me, but is it their fault or is it the code? Right? You take one stance and you feel really strongly. I feel really strongly about this. Well, guess what? You just polarized yourself to one polarity. So now you're going to attract the opposite. Stay a neutron. Stay neutral. Don't go in either direction. If you catch yourself polarized, quickly pull yourself back into the center. Remember they say, like, be centered. That's because you're going to avoid attracting any polarity to you. You can almost like shake the code off of you in a way. Does that make sense? Like, impose a polarity. If you're working really hard, go and rest. Because you're too extreme on one end. Go fucking rest. Otherwise, it will force you to rest. It's not even by force, it's a program. You're working too hard on one, you're going to attract the zero. You better just go lay your ass down somewhere. You're eating too much, you better go fast. Or something's going to make you not eat. It's the code. It's not even like, it's like just like AI. You put in 0, it's going to give you 1. It's going to give you the code. It's already built in. From this point on, things should beginning. I should say things should start beginning. My brain just jumped like fucking 4 sentences or 4 words. Things should start beginning to make more sense. Thanks for listening.